The first group of organic molecules that we will study are the carbohydrates. The question always comes up, what exactly is a carbohydrate? Remember that we're going to learn several things about each group of organic molecules, so I'll start with these elements. The elements of carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That means that whenever you look at a chemical formula of a carbohydrate, those are the only elements that you will see. Even better, they're arranged in a characteristic ratio. So you will find that it is 1:2 to 1, and that means that there is 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogens and then 1 oxygen. So twice as many hydrogens as carbons or hydrogens. The monomers, remember, these are the small organic molecules that are added together over and over again in dehydration synthesis to make the polymers. These are called monosaccharides in carbohydrates. There were 3 that you will need to know. They are glucose, galactose, and fructose. I have diagrams of each of them posted. What's interesting about them is that they all 3 have the same chemical formula, C6H12O6, but they all have different structural formulas. Therefore, they are isomers. You can use this to help you recognize the different monosaccharides. If you're looking at the diagrams, the first thing you'll notice is that the one for glucose has numbers on it. Just ignore those. These are used by biochemists to help them when they get into really big molecules and they're having to discuss the position of various functional groups. We're not really going to use that at this point, so you can just ignore it. But also notice that glucose forms a 6-sided ring, and so does galactose. So it's going to be very difficult for you to tell the difference between glucose or galactose. So that's okay, just guess one of the 2. Fructose, on the other hand, forms a 5-sided ring. Therefore, you can always recognize fructose and determine that that is not glucose or galactose. The function of monosaccharides? Well, your body is going to use these as the immediate source of fuel to power the reactions that you do called cell respiration. If you're eating these are going to be your simple carbohydrates. That are found in candy, Coke, other things like that. So that's where you get it down to glucose, galactose, and fructose. When we start putting the monomers or monosaccharides together, we begin to build polymers. The first type of polymer that you would study would be a disaccharide, di meaning 2. So these are all examples that have just 2 monomers put together. If you notice, there are 3 that you need to know. Lactose is a combination formed from galactose and glucose. This is the disaccharide that's found in milk, so this is your milk sugar. Maltose is formed from glucose and glucose. If you've ever had a milkshake that has a malt flavor, so it's actually called a malt, that would be a drink that is made with this type of sugar. The third one is the common table sugar, what you typically have on your sugar to add to your cereal or something like that, and that's sucrose. And that one is formed from 1 glucose plus 1 fructose. The polysaccharides get larger from here. The more complex ones that we will talk about will have more than 2 glucoses bonded together, or monosaccharides. These are going to be the great big ones. And in fact, what's interesting is they all wind up being just glucoses bonded together. So in these, we really don't see the fructoses and the galactoses bonded together. The first example is starch, which is produced by plants, not animals, but plants. And this is going to be an energy storage molecule for plants. It turns out that it's very difficult to store glucose. So what the plant does is it links all of its glucoses together that it forms from photosynthesis and stores these within its various storage structures within its cells. Glycogen is produced by animals, and it serves a similar function. We produce this by linking our glucoses together, and then we store it in our muscle and our liver. The third type of polysaccharide that you need to be familiar with is cellulose. Again, this is produced by plants, but it has a different function. It's not designed for an energy storage molecule. It is designed to provide support for the plant. We think of it as fiber. You see, it's indigestible by not only us, but most organisms. Only pretty much bacteria can digest it. So we use this to help us keep our intestines moving. The fiber almost acts like a sponge, and it helps substances pass through our gut. This is one of the main reasons that you should eat 3 to 4 servings of vegetables each day. The examples of these are shown in this slide. Glycogen and starch look very, very similar. They are branching chains of hydrocarbons. You won't be able to tell them apart. So if you see a structure that looks like this, guess either glycogen or starch. Cellulose looks slightly different. If you look carefully at this cellulose shown here, it may have some branching, but the key thing here is that to look at the bonding. It's kind of crazy to say, but look at the OH groups. When you looked at glycogen and starch, if you look across the bottom, the OH groups are always facing down. But on the cellulose, it alternates. So the first ring, it's down. The second ring, it is up. And the third ring, it is down. It's almost as if they flip the molecule up and down. This makes the cellulose difficult to digest. It takes a special type of enzyme to accomplish this, and we don't have it. Cellulite sounds a lot like cellulose, but it's not the same. So it's not even an organic molecule, so keep this separate. We will talk about this in class. Special characteristics of carbohydrates? Well, probably the best one has to do with that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. It will help you always identify carbohydrates, especially for monosaccharides. However, if you're dealing with a larger polysaccharide, such as a disaccharide or even ones called trisaccharides, you need to be aware that the ratio will change slightly. Think about this. Whenever you take 2 monosaccharides and bond them together in dehydration synthesis, a water is removed from the 2 monosaccharides. So the formula for the disaccharides will change slightly. So here's what we have. If the basic formula for a monosaccharide is C6H12O6, if you have 2 bonded together, you just multiply them by 2 to come up with C12H24O12. However, you have to subtract out the water where the 2 bonded together. So the real formula winds up being C12H22O11. I've shown you the diagrams of this below, so you can see that the ring of the first monosaccharide plus the ring of the second, and then I've written the formulas below. If the answer on the right shows the strike-throughs, so that you know that it is C12H22O11, and of course those elements don't disappear. They are going to wind up being the water molecule that is formed during this reaction. So now you get to try one on your own. What would the chemical formula for a polysaccharide be that is formed from 3 glucoses bonded together? Remember, you have to remove a water at every bond. Follow the same pattern that we used on the last example. Check your work. So now what you should see is that the C6H12O6 can be multiplied by 3 to give you C18, H36, and O18. But that's not the final answer, because we have, actually there's an error on this slide. There are 2 waters removed where they are bonded together. I caught myself here making a mistake. So instead of 3 waters being produced, it would be 2 waters being produced. So if you would correct my slide, the final formula would be C18H32O16, and there would be 2 waters produced. This is a good example of how people make a mistake with this. Remember that the bonds are formed where you join the 2 molecules together. So if there are 3 monomers together, there would be 2 waters produced.